Most people think cell towers and GPS are how investigators locate a phone. Sometimes they are. Those are just two of more than 30 different ways a phone's location can be determined. Some methods depend on signals, others recognize the world around the phone, and a few can reveal where a phone has been without ever calculating its location at all. Of the more than 30 different ways a phone's location can be determined, only a fraction of them regularly become evidence in a criminal investigation. The rest are still worth understanding because they show just how many ways a phone can understand where it is. As we go, we'll separate the genuinely useful from the merely interesting, and by the end I'll show you two that just may blow your socks off. One thing becomes clear once you start looking at these technologies. Most were never designed to locate people. They were built to solve completely different problems. Location just happened to be a useful byproduct. Let's start with the granddaddy of them all, cell towers. Your smartphone may be incredibly sophisticated, but when it connects to a cellular network, it's behaving much like the earliest cell phones, which had far more in common with handheld radios than the smartphones we carry today. The network's first job has never been to locate your phone. It's simply been to keep it connected. Everything else is a byproduct of that job. Over time, though, those simple tower connections have evolved into much more sophisticated methods of estimating a phone's location, including timing advance and other carrier-specific approaches. None of that happened overnight. First, the network learned which side of the tower your phone was on. Then it became much better at estimating how far away it was. Add information from multiple towers, and that search area gets smaller still. None of these methods is perfectly precise. Their accuracy depends on things like tower density, terrain, network design, and the methods available to a particular carrier. But the location doesn't always have to be precise. For investigators, useful and precise aren't always the same thing. They're often accurate enough to establish movement, support other evidence, or challenge a version of events in court. Most people picture GPS as satellites in space tracking a phone across a map. That's actually not what's happening. In fact, the satellites have no idea where you are or if your phone is even on or off. What your phone is doing is listening to signals from satellites. The phone then calculates its own position from those signals. Those apps and services with permissions on your phone simply use that location. Modern phones usually aren't relying on GPS alone. They're often using several satellite constellations at the same time to improve accuracy. Another thing many people don't realize is that GPS doesn't depend on cell service. If your phone has a clear view of the sky, it can usually determine its location even with no cellular connection at all. GPS is remarkably accurate outdoors, but anything that blocks or reflects those satellite signals, like buildings, tunnels, heavy tree cover, or even dense city streets, can reduce that accuracy. And in some parts of the world, governments also interfere with satellite navigation signals, which can make GPS unreliable or unavailable for periods of time. I've had first-hand experience with this, and it can be incredibly frustrating even to catch a rideshare. For investigators, GPS can be one of the most precise sources of location information available, when it's available. If GPS struggles indoors, what's one of the most common ways your phone still knows where it is? Well, it's Wi-Fi. Most people assume your phone has to connect to a Wi-Fi network before it can help determine its location. It doesn't need to connect at all. In fact, it doesn't even need to know the password. It only needs to recognize the Wi-Fi networks around it. Your phone then compares those nearby Wi-Fi networks against massive location databases maintained by huge tech companies like Apple and Google, and then gets a location estimate back. No Wi-Fi logging is required. Since this capability is only trying to help the phone locate itself, the phone only gets a location in return, not a permanent record of how that location was determined. So investigators usually aren't recovering artifacts from this capability itself. The technology is known as the Wi-Fi Positioning System, or WPS. We don't need to unpack all the engineering behind it. The important point is that your phone can often estimate its location simply by recognizing the Wi-Fi networks around where the device happens to be. In cities and suburbs, Wi-Fi can be remarkably accurate. Out in rural areas or in places With few mapped access points, it's much less effective. GPS looks to the sky, while Wi-Fi just looks around the neighborhood. So far, we've talked about technologies that help a phone understand where it is. Bluetooth is a little different. Most people think of Bluetooth as a way for devices to communicate, but that's only half the story. It can also tell your phone what's nearby, and in many cases, how close those things are. Now, technically, those aren't exactly the same thing. Even though they're both called Bluetooth, the way devices exchange information isn't quite the same as the way that they estimate distance. We'll leave the communications side of Bluetooth until we look at the digital traces phones leave behind. In this section, we're going to focus on how Bluetooth helps a phone understand what's around it. If you've ever received or heard about an alert that an unknown AirTag may be traveling with you, you've probably already seen Bluetooth proximity in action. Your phone isn't using GPS to figure that out. It's recognizing that the same Bluetooth device has remained near you over time. If you'd like to understand how Apple and Google built that capability and applied it to anti-stalking, and how your phone can leave traces on nearby phones even when it's offline, I've covered it in a separate video. Suffice it to say, your phone is constantly surrounded by Bluetooth signals. AirTags, Bluetooth beacons inside airports, hospitals, museums, and stores. You have your digital car keys, even nearby phones. Simply recognizing some of those nearby devices, and in some cases estimating how close they are, can help a phone understand what's around it. The same idea is also used for indoor positioning in places where GPS simply can't help. Bluetooth can be surprisingly accurate in that role. But for finding the exact position of something nearby, phones now have something even better. It's called ultra-wideband, and it takes that idea to an entirely different level. We don't need to discuss how it works here. The important point is that phones are becoming remarkably good at understanding what's around them. Like every method we've covered so far, Bluetooth has its limitations. It only works where there are nearby devices or beacons to recognize. And for many, though not all, of these techniques, Bluetooth also has to be enabled on the device. Sometimes investigators just don't want to know where a phone was. They want to know what or who was close enough to matter. Forget radio altogether. Sometimes your phone doesn't need radio signals at all. Sometimes it just needs to literally look around. Modern phones can recognize buildings, roads, signs, storefronts, landmarks, and other visual features of the world around them. When enough of those features match known locations, a phone can estimate where it is, sometimes with remarkable precision. The technology is generally known as the Visual Positioning System, or VPS. The underlying computer vision is incredibly sophisticated. Depending on the device and application, that processing may happen on the phone, in the cloud, or a combination of both. Again, we don't need to understand those differences here. The important point is that a phone can sometimes recognize where it is simply by recognizing what it sees. And that's not just what's cool. Sometimes the camera doesn't even have to recognize where it is. Sometimes it quietly remembers where it was. Every time you take a photograph, your phone may quietly write invisible information directly into the photo itself. The date, the time, the camera used, and if location services are enabled, where the picture was taken. You never see it, but investigators often can. Unlike visual positioning systems, those records are often recoverable long after the photo was taken. Like every method we've covered, these capabilities have limitations. Visual positioning only works when there are enough recognizable features to compare. Photographs don't always contain location information. It can be disabled, or that invisible information can be removed, which is why investigators compare photographs with everything else they've collected. Sometimes the most revealing part of a photograph isn't what's in the picture. It's what the phone quietly remembered after taking it. Could your phone still locate itself if it couldn't see the outside world at all? So far, every method we've looked at has depended on something outside the phones, like cell towers and satellites, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, even the camera. But what if all those disappeared? Your phone still wouldn't be completely lost. People think that the motion sensors in a phone simply rotate the screen and count your steps. They also help the phone understand how it's moving. Every smartphone contains sensors that measure movement, acceleration, rotation, even tiny changes in air pressure. Taken together, those sensors can estimate whether a phone is walking, running, turning corners, or changing direction. This is often called dead reckoning. The mathematics isn't important. What is that the phone can continue estimating its own movement even after other location technologies begin to struggle. Small measurement errors can accumulate over time, so without occasional corrections from GPS, Wi Fi, or other technologies, the estimate gradually drifts away from reality. Even so, the fact that a phone can continue estimating its own movement without seeing the outside world is actually a remarkable engineering achievement. For investigators, it's something else entirely, though. Motion sensors don't just help answer where a phone was, they can help answer what it was doing while there. Was someone walking, running, climbing stairs, driving, or was the phone sitting motionless on a table? Most of us carry and use our phones in surprisingly predictable and uniquely identifiable ways. Those motion patterns can sometimes distinguish whether the phone was actually being carried by its owner or by someone else. They can also challenge stories that don't fit the sensor data. For example, simply leaving a phone at home streaming Netflix doesn't necessarily create a convincing alibi if the motion centers tell a completely different story, or no story at all. You can lie about where you were. Convincing your phone to tell the same lie is much harder. What if one of the most detailed records of your location wasn't created to help your phone navigate, but to help advertisers connect your movements to your interests? Everything we've covered so far has been about the phone figuring out where it is. This one is about other people figuring out where your phone is. Maybe you stop at a sporting goods store, then a coffee shop, then a car dealership. To an advertiser, those aren't just places, they're interests. Just as revealing are the places you never visit, maybe bars or churches or fast food restaurants, feed stores, or the gym. Every smartphone contains an advertising identifier. Its original purpose wasn't to help your phone determine where it was. It was to help advertisers recognize the same phone from one app to another, from one store to another, or even across online advertisements. It's about linking the same device across different digital and physical environments to a single common identifier, meaning you. Apps that include advertising software can collect location information associated with that identifier. Not every app does. Not every app collects the same information. But together, those records can paint a remarkably detailed picture of where a phone has been over days, weeks, months, or even years. Here's the part that most people don't realize. You can disable location sharing for every single app on your phone, and your activity on the internet may still reveal your advertising identifier. It's a different path, but the advertisers know it's the same phone. Like every method we've discussed, it has its limitations, though. Users can reset their advertising identifier. Permissions can be denied. The amount and quality of location data varies dramatically from application to application. But when those records do exist, they can become an extraordinarily valuable source of historical location information. Entire companies exist to collect, analyze, and sell this type of advertising data. One well-known example is Fog Reveal, which has been used to analyze location data associated with advertising identifiers. If you followed the Idaho 4 case, you've probably heard defense expert Cy Ray argue that investigators should have analyzed MAID data alongside the other available sources of location evidence. Whether that would have changed the outcome isn't the point. The point is this: one of the richest sources of location of information about you was never created for navigation. It was created to connect your movements to your interests to increase sales. Every time your phone interacts with the world, it leaves another breadcrumb. So far, we've looked at technologies that help a phone determine where it is. We've also looked at technologies that help other people determine where your phone has been. This section is different. It's about the evidence your phone creates simply by doing what phones do. Every day, your phone quietly interacts with the digital world. This is where ordinary activity starts becoming potential evidence. Some of those breadcrumbs come from Wi-Fi networks a phone has joined. Others come from applications quietly synchronizing in the background. And remember when I said we'd come back to the communication side of Bluetooth? This is one of those breadcrumbs. A phone may leave evidence that it paired with various Bluetooth devices. None of those activities were designed to create location evidence. They're simply part of how a modern smartphone works. Location just happened to be a byproduct. And every year there are more of these breadcrumbs than the year before. Here's how quickly those breadcrumbs are evolving. Flock Safety recently introduced Signal Trace. Instead of simply taking a photo of a vehicle's license plate, the cameras can now associate the wireless devices traveling in that vehicle along with it. Maybe you buy a new phone. That's a change that may have been quietly recording without you even ever mentioning it to anyone. Maybe you started carrying a burner phone instead of your regular phone. Now that burner phone can become associated with your license plate. Or perhaps you leave home with two devices, but return with only one. That's another change. You're not doing anything unusual. You're simply driving with your stuff. But your phone and the other devices traveling with you are quietly leaving digital breadcrumbs. Even these breadcrumbs have limitations. Any one breadcrumb might be incomplete, misleading, or even wrong. By themselves, these breadcrumbs may not mean very much. But every day there are more of them. And these breadcrumbs aren't just accumulating, they're becoming richer. What if your phone wasn't the only source of location evidence? So far, we focused on what the phone knows. People often imagine investigators examining a single phone. In reality, they're often examining an entire digital ecosystem of independent systems that can each remember a different part of the story. Earlier, we looked at how advertising systems can consolidate information about a phone into a single identifier. This is different. Here, the information isn't being brought together. It's scattered across an ecosystem of independent systems. I noticed this in a very real way during a recent trip through Eastern Europe and Asia. Even though I wasn't actively using my cellular phone very much, it still received the occasional spam call, placing me in those locations through my phone provider. My apps continued refreshing in the background, and my devices continued to quietly phone home. All perfectly normal smartphone activity. The important point is that those breadcrumbs weren't all being created by the same system, or even by systems in the same country. Different organizations were independently creating different pieces of the same story. Modern phones are surrounded by connected devices and connected services. Smartwatches, vehicles, smart home devices, cloud services, and countless other connected systems. Each one was designed to do a specific job, not to investigate anyone, but many of them quietly remember that the phone was there. Your car may remember when your phone connected, when the trip started or where it ended, or even the last place it was parked. Some vehicles also retain copies of contacts, recent calls, and other information synchronized from your phone, sometimes long after you've forgotten it was ever there. Smart home devices may remember when your phone arrived or when it left, or when someone interacted with the home digitally while that phone was present. Some smart TVs and other connected devices can also retain technical information about the devices sharing the same network. Depending on the device and manufacturer, that information can provide investigators with yet another independent piece of the story. Like everything else, though, the ecosystem can have limitations. Because they exist in different systems, some records disappear quickly. Some records may disappear quickly. Others may have never even existed. And even when they do exist, investigators may not be able to access them. No single system remembers everything, but together they can remember remarkably more than what you might expect. People think your phone's microphone is only interesting when it's recording conversations. Sometimes it doesn't have to hear you at all. Every location has its own acoustic fingerprint. Airport announcements, train stations, traffic, construction, church bells, sporting events, even the unique background sounds of a city. Modern phones can sometimes compare those sounds against known environments to help estimate where they are. But ambient sound is only part of the story. Some systems use ultrasonic and other acoustic beacons that most people can't hear at all. Those signals are designed for phones and other electronic devices, not for people. Imagine walking into a retail store. You don't hear anything unusual, but the store speakers are broadcasting an inaudible signal your phone can detect. Suddenly, the store's app doesn't just know you're in the store, it may know exactly where in the store you're standing. Unlike ambient sound, these signals are intentionally designed to be detected by electronic devices. To us, the room sounds perfectly quiet. To a phone, it may contain another clue about where it is. You might be wondering about Alexa devices at this point. That's a different technical problem entirely, and I've already covered it in a separate video. Like the camera, none of this happens unless an application has permission to use the microphone. Most apps request that permission for perfectly legitimate reasons. The important point is that once an app can hear the world around the phone, it may be able to recognize far more than just a conversation. Like many of the technologies we've discussed, it wasn't designed to investigate people. It was designed to solve a completely different problem. Location just happened to be another byproduct. Acoustic positioning, though, has its own limitations. The phone has to be listening, the environment has to be distinctive, or the necessary beacon infrastructure has to exist. For investigators, the conversation isn't always the evidence. Sometimes the background is. Those ordinary sounds can sometimes verify or completely contradict where someone claims to have been. Sometimes your microphone doesn't have to hear what it's saying. Sometimes where you're saying it is enough. Just when you think we've run out of ways to locate a phone, this one might be the craziest yet. But before we go any further, this has nothing to do with taking photographs or traditional camera use. The camera is simply acting as another sensor, continuously analyzing the environment in front of it. People think light is only for people. Sometimes it's for phones. So imagine standing in the lighting aisle of a massive retail store. The store's app doesn't just know you're somewhere inside the building, it can help guide you to the exact shelf you're looking for. How? Not because the phone recognizes the products, but because the overhead LED lights are transmitting tiny identifiers the phone's camera can detect. Most people never notice them. Phones can. Carrefour, which is one of the world's largest retailers, used this approach to help shoppers navigate enormous stores using that Carrefour app. The technical details aren't important here. The point is that your phone can sometimes determine where it is by recognizing information carried in ordinary light. Those signals aren't intended to communicate with you, they're designed to communicate with electronic devices. Like the camera example we discussed earlier, none of this happens unless an application has permission to use the camera. Most apps request that permission for perfectly legitimate reasons. Once an app can see the environment, it may also be able to detect information people never notice. Again, this wasn't designed to investigate people. It was designed to solve a completely different product. And location, just the byproduct. Optical positioning has its own limitations. The phone has to be able to see the signal, the necessary infrastructure has to exist, and the application has to be looking for it. For investigators, this is rarely a primary source of location evidence, but like every technology we've covered, under the right circumstances, it can become another independent clue. Sometimes the fastest way to tell a phone where it is with light people never even notice. After everything we've covered, you may be wondering which of these methods investigators trust the most. The answer usually isn't just one. Behind the various domains we've discussed are more than 30 independent techniques that can provide clues about where a phone has been. We spared you most of the technical details so we could focus on how investigators actually use them. That's exactly why investigators compare as many independent sources as possible before drawing conclusions. When independent sources all point to the same conclusion, confidence begins to grow. Not because one method is perfect, but because systems that were designed for completely different purposes all arrive at the same answer. For those who followed the Idaho 4 case, you'll probably recognize this principle. One of defense expert Cy Ray's central contentions was that investigators should have analyzed all of the available sources of location information rather than just relying on a subset of the available evidence. Whether you ultimately agree with that position or not isn't the point. The more independent domains of evidence that investigators can compare, the more confidence they can have in the conclusions they reach. What if one of them is wrong? Investigators expect that possibility. Sometimes the evidence doesn't agree. These moments can be just as important. A disagreement forces investigators to ask why. Was one record incomplete? Was a clock incorrect? Did someone leave a phone behind? Or does the contradiction reveal something investigators had previously considered? Real investigations aren't won by a single perfect artifact. They're won when independent evidence keeps pointing to the same conclusion. If you found today's capabilities surprising, the road ahead is even more interesting. Technology companies don't stop when there's a gap in capabilities. They keep introducing new features to close that gap. And sometimes they redesign existing features in ways that create entirely new digital interactions. Consider how the definition of offline has changed since the Idaho 4 case in 2022. Today, a phone that appears disconnected may still be discoverable through technologies designed to help recover lost devices. Some modern phones even remain partially active after they've been powered off, allowing certain low-power components to continue participating in device-finding networks. That's another design decision that also creates additional digital breadcrumbs. Or consider another seemingly unrelated design decision. Removing the headphone jack from phones encouraged millions of people to adopt Bluetooth devices for everyday use. It wasn't about listening to music, but the result was a world where phones now interact with far more Bluetooth devices than they once ever did. That's another design decision that also creates additional digital breadcrumbs. Now, privacy laws and regulations are sometimes slow, but do continue to evolve. They influence what information can be collected, how long it can be retained, who it can be shared with, and increasingly how it can be correlated with other information. In turn, companies redesign products to comply or accept the financial and legal consequences of not doing so. Artificial intelligence is changing the picture too, not because it creates new digital breadcrumbs, but because it can connect the ones that already exist. Relationships exist across independent systems and contain patterns that humans might never notice. And AI enables correlation at a speed and scale no human investigator could ever hope to match. Most of these decisions aren't made by engineers or investigators. They're made by us, the consumer, usually with a single tap, often by accepting the default settings chosen for us. Those defaults may deliver the experience the product was designed to provide, but they may also shape the information our devices collect, share, and retain. Understanding those choices and the trade-offs they create may become just as important as understanding the technology itself. The future may not be one revolutionary technology. It may simply be the day there are no meaningful gaps left and nowhere left to hide. If you like my videos and how I present the information, please subscribe and like the video.